Hello, this is Kristina Smith, and you're about to watch a short clip from my presentation at Social Media Day Conference 2015 in Tri-Cities, Washington. This is just a short 8-minute clip. To watch the entire clip, you can access that via Google Hangouts on Air by searching Marketing to Millennials Social Media Day Tri-Cities. So here's a clip talking about millennials. They're definitely causing some stir in the marketing space. So I hope that you enjoy this presentation, and thank you for watching.
So I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited that you all have come to watch the presentation. So as Ben said, I'm talking about marketing to millennials. So how many of you have not heard of a millennial? Exactly. So I think everybody knows the term, right? Everybody's heard of millennials. And the reality is they're kind of causing a lot of disruption in the marketing space because they are quite different from the generations before them. They do things a lot differently, and in terms of marketing, the strategies that people use to really target this generation have changed over time. So I titled this reality check because I think there are a lot of perceptions around millennials that are maybe a little off. There's some that are accurate, but I think there's a lot to really look at. So I've only got about 20 minutes, so I'm not going to touch on everything, but my goal is to give you all sort of a high-level view. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about three things. The first one is the stereotypes. So if you have heard of millennials, I'm sure that everything that you have heard is not all positive. There are some negative stereotypes going around about millennials. There are some positive things going on about millennials. So I want to address that full on. I like to say, people say that if they're from a certain city, they can make fun of those people. So if I was a New Yorker, I can make fun of New Yorkers. I'm a millennial, so I will get real about millennials and give you the real take on who we are and what we think. So I want to address those stereotypes, but not just to dwell on them, but I want to challenge them and help you to understand how really getting inside the mind of millennials can help you to market to them. And then the next thing I want to touch on are some marketing mishaps. So I think because there are so many different perspectives on who the millennial is, how they think, there are some brands and businesses that are hitting the mark right on, and there are some that are a little off. So I just want to touch on what some of those things are. And lastly, just end up with some of the reality check of what actually is going on in the mind of millennials and kind of help to give you all a guide on how to really target them. And I also want to preface this with saying that some of you may feel like now your business is not targeted toward millennials. But the reality is in maybe 10 years, a decade from now, millennials will be your target market if you still are in business. So that is something to really think about. Millennials are the consumers of now and of the future. So I think it's important for all business owners, no matter what your target market is to really understand what's going on in the minds of this generation. So before I start presenting, let me give you a little background about who I am and what my background is in marketing. So I am actually a Walla Walla native. I was born and raised in Walla Walla, and of course spent a lot of time in the Tri-Cities because we didn't really have a real mall. So if you wanted to go anywhere that was exciting, you came to the Tri-Cities. So because I was born and raised in Walla Walla, spent a lot of time in this area. I started out at Whitman College and actually decided to pursue business. So I went to Emory University in Atlanta and got my undergraduate business degree. And then after that, I went into corporate America and went straight to marketing. I got to work in New York City. I've gotten to work with some awesome brands. But after doing that, I actually decided that my passion was with a small business owner. My mother's actually a small business owner in Walla Walla. I grew up around that. And so I decided to leave the corporate world and start working with small business owners like yourselves. And so I did that for about 3 years, was in the Tri-Cities area. And throughout that experience, I've gotten to work with some amazing small business owners, corporations, of course, startups. And throughout all of that, I've seen that no matter what the target market was, millennials were really disrupting things for some of the business owners in terms of how they were they were targeting millennials and just how the internet, social media has really changed things for small business owners. So I thought that this was an important topic to really touch on. And again, whether or not this is your target market right now, I think it's important to understand what this generation is doing for marketing as a whole. So getting right into it. So let's look at millennial stereotypes. So this group is described as a highly communicative and connected generation, probably one of the most connected generations to date. And that's generally positive, right? There's nothing too negative about that. But there are a few other ways that millennials are described. And again, I just want to touch on a couple of these. Let's go back. So the first one, selfish and entitled. Millennials have gotten the reputation for being very self-focused. We just had a presentation talking about selfies. So the selfies that you see are usually from millennials. So they've gotten this reputation for being very self-focused and entitled. I think, especially if you're looking at comparing this generation to previous generations, there is a little bit of a different approach to how millennials kind of what they value and what their activities are. So they've been called selfish and entitled. They've also been called lazy and non-committal. Where this comes from, I believe, has a lot to do with how millennials are in the workplace as well. Gone are the days that a millennial will stay at a company for decades and look to retire there, spend their whole lives at one company. Really, millennials are adventurous. They are jumping around. They are really looking for something exciting. They want to travel. They're stimulated by a lot of different things. Millennials grew up with technology in their hands, which means that they've had access to an abundance of information from the very beginning. And so that leaves them with a desire and a thirst for knowledge. They're constantly wanting to learn new things. But again, for previous generations, this may come across as lazy, non-committal. Again, my point is to lay these out here. We won't necessarily get into a debate about whether or not they're true, but I think it's important to understand what's being said about millennials because I want to then look at it from a marketing perspective and what that means for you as a small business owner. The last one. All millennials are always looking at their iPhones and they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they never look up from their phones. So yes, there's some merit to that, right? There are a lot of millennials that spend a lot of time on Facebook and Instagram, and they are very connected, going back to this idea that they're one of the most highly communicative and connected generations. They are always wanting to be in the know, and they are very active on social media. So like I said, I think I want to address these stereotypes because I think it's important to understand them, but I want to look at them from a marketing perspective and think about what this means for you as a small business owner, for your brand, for your product. So when we think about millennials and we say they're selfish or entitled, I want to challenge that and say the millennial is an empowered consumer more than ever before, meaning that they will not just take the message that they're being given anymore. Gone are the days that a consumer is going to say, okay, because you market to me and you tell me that your brand is the best or your product is the best, I'm going to believe you. Because now we've got access to Google, we've got access to Yelp, we've got access to information on what we can find about your product or service that you're not necessarily telling us. So I think this is something that millennials have really introduced more than any other generation because they are really heavily influenced by what they find out about your brand or your service or your product. And also, they're talking to their friends, they're talking to their peers, and millennials are very driven by that. So if I hear about your product or service, I'm going to probably ask a friend first, or I'm going to go on some sort of blog site to see what's really going on and what conversations are really happening around your brand. So again, selfish, entitled, or really just an empowered consumer, and that they do believe that, hey, if I'm going to invest in a product or a service, I have to make sure that it makes sense for me. So that's just a different way to look at it. So this next one, lazy and non-committal. I'm going to go ahead and let Bill Gates answer this one for me. So you can read this, read this quote really quick. I think that millennials have a different approach to how they work and the things that they do. So, we've got this quote here by a very intelligent man who's gotten a lot of things done. Millennials are not necessarily about putting in hours and hours to get something done.
And that's all for now, guys. Thanks again for watching this short clip. Again, if you want to watch the full thing, go ahead and check it out on Google Hangouts on Air, Social Media Day Tri-Cities.